One. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer, and we're going to get right down to business today because we have just a small amount of time. My good friend, Mark Devlin, after I thought what was only a year, but is really almost 2 years, is back. He's got a new book, Musical Truth 3, a little different than the others, but also similar in tone. Mark, my good friend, welcome back. How are you?
Hey, good to be back with you. Well, I'm getting through in whatever ways I can, same as anyone else, I guess.
Yeah.
Doing what we need to do.
Absolutely. No matter what the issue, like, I don't know a single person who's just skated through this time, right? Whether they agree with us, disagree with us, what the issue is or isn't or whatnot, everybody's had to do some major adjusting to the way they deploy themselves in the world, the way they receive others, all that kind of stuff. So I understand, but here we are. So you have a new book out, and I'm assuming I read most of it, as always happens with when I have you on about one of your books. I always forget how many interesting links you have. So I don't allot enough time to read and look at the links. And therefore, when I go looking at the links, I cut off the amount of time I have allotted for reading. So I got about three-quarters the way through it, and I will finish it. But I think I got, the overall gist. And my assumption is that when you just said you were going to write a third book, it was before this nonsense of the last couple of years. And so you had to write something a little different than what you had planned. What had you planned, and what did you end up doing?
That's right. I had it in mind that I wanted to complete the trilogy of Musical Truth books. And I completed my allegorical novel, The Cause and the Cure, at the end of 2019. And so I had it in mind that the next book project would be Musical Truth Volume 3. And I'd intended to spend 2020 touring, promoting The Cause and the Cure and going to book festivals and doing meetup groups and stuff like that. Well, we know the rest, don't we?
Yes.
That didn't exactly happen the way it was supposed to. So I spent the whole of 2020 just coming to terms with what the hell was going on in the world and just navigating my way through the madness and the insanity the best I could, same as everyone else. And it got to the beginning of 2021, and I thought, okay, I've now got to knuckle down and focus and get this next book written. So I spent from January to October of 2021 writing it. And I had in mind that I wanted to get it out just prior to Christmas of 2021. So I achieved that. It's been out a few weeks now. And the intention now is to spend 2022 touring and promoting that. And it's looking like I'm only going to be able to do that in the UK. I am getting around quite widely. I'm doing a whole bunch of conferences over here, but it doesn't look like I'm going to be traveling internationally anytime soon, because I don't do nonsense. I don't do BS. And until all that has gone away, I won't be jumping on a plane again anytime soon. So that's a real shame, because I love coming to America. I love going all over Europe. And that's something I enjoyed the most about life up until the end of 2019. And it's something that I've found the hardest over these past 2 years, just not being able to travel freely. It is an inherent right in creation, freedom of movement. So long as you're causing no harm, then it's not a problem. And nobody has the right to try and take that away from you. But obviously those attempts are taking place. So I'm stuck on British shores for the foreseeable future, just making the best of the situation. And this book is slightly different to the others in that initially it was intended to talk about the music business and tie up all the loose ends and kind of bring the story to a close. But obviously world events took off the way they did, and I felt the need to address that. And I saw an opening for this book to act as an A to Z, all you need to know wake-up guide for the average normie who might be a little slow on the uptake. And so the idea is that many of my regular readers who know all about this music industry stuff will still be interested in reading the book, but they might then consider gifting it to a friend or a family member or a colleague or somebody who has yet to twig that something isn't quite right about what we've been told is going on in the world. So a lot of the content is actually non-music related. It's talking about the scamdemic. It's breaking down how every aspect of it is fraudulent. And I'm providing citations and references every step of the way. It's an important part of being a researcher if you want to be taken seriously. I discovered that with my first book. The minute you make any kind of wild claim, and I've made a few in some of the stuff I've presented, some controversial comments, you know, a lot of people would jump on you and say, where did you get that from? You've made that up. So you've got to be able to point them to the documentation that you took it from, or the interview that you're referencing. And so this book is absolutely packed with those kinds of references. There's been a lot of wild claims made the last couple of years. Don't know if you've noticed, Emily, about this.
I've made a few of them myself.
Yeah. But in terms of, you know, things that are going on behind the scenes and groups that might be working towards particular goals and objectives, and there are whole YouTubers and pundits out there, talking heads on the internet, who have made a living for themselves out of coming on shows and saying this is happening and this person's doing this and this group's taking this down, and there's not a shred of evidence for anything that they present. And that's a real problem, because I learned that if you want to be taken seriously as a professional researcher or broadcaster, you've got to be able to show your citations, your references. And so that's what I do. And, you know, everything checks out. Every claim that I'm making in the book, I can point to validation and proof and evidence to show where it came from. So a few people have commented that it feels very different to the other two Musical Truth books. And they've said it doesn't really feel like those books at all. And I can understand why people would say that, because so much of the content is non-music related. But I do still have 4 chapters, which I've titled Sound Bites. And these kind of intersperse the main chapters and provide a bit of a rhythmic break. And they go into previous points and, you know, assertions that I've made about stuff that goes on in the industry, just providing further proof and further evidence of these things to further validate them. So that's what the book consists of. It's sort of one half more music related content, but the other half is some quite different material.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So first of all, your book is like about as heavily footnoted as or, you know, link noted as RFK's new book. So congratulations on giving that one a run for the money. That one has like, you know, 12 million citations and whatnot. But, you know, you do a really good job at providing the documentation and the links for the facts, and then being very clear when you're speculating or going conspiratorial or synchromistic without there being something people would call documentation per se, right? And for what you said about there's people who've made entire livings about making claims, not providing any documentation, and then those things never, ever happening. Like they never claim that.
Oh, you noticed.
Right. They're never claiming that what they're doing is speculating or what they're doing is synchromysticism. They're saying that this is the truth. And so there's a couple of ways you can go with this, right? Like most, obviously you do some of this stuff in your book of sort of speculating, but most of your work is really based around things you can document. And then you have someone like myself and my podcast mate, Michael Wan and whatnot, who much of what we do is speculation and synchromysticism, but we're saying that. And either way, like the things that we say we're making up, those are bearing more fruit in terms of what actually happens than the people who say that they're telling us the truth, but not providing documentation. So you can go, there's many ways you can go with this, but what you're talking about is not only a huge fraud in terms of the truth being perpetrated against otherwise, you know, like a group of people that are desperately wanting the truth in terms of like tricking them, but also like robbing their mental energy, right? Like, you know, and the time that they spend looking at things as well, right? Because there's never, I mean, it has never let up. There has never been like a break in that content for people to sort of reassess or whatnot. And I mean, there are some people who eventually, you know, see the forest for the trees or tire of it, but I'm shocked by how many people are still taken in by that, right? You know, so that's the sort of balance you achieve in this book. And it is different, right? This one is definitely a little, it's not as like, it doesn't flow in the same way. It's a little more chopped up into like, you know, you have all this sort of stuff about the Convid, right? And then you have these sound bites and you're sort of weaving in the connections between sort of the behavior or the work of some of these musicians or groups or people or whatever, and what's going on now. So it's kind of different, but, you know, in some ways you're wrapping up your series and it is a different book because the music has changed. The music is basically over. Right? You don't need to do any more musical truths because I don't know if there's going to be anything that you and I would consider music going on in any significant way anytime soon. Right. And so I think that the difference in the book is appropriate for where we're at.
Right. You've just frozen on me there. Can you still hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, your image froze, but I can still hear you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that. I think I've made the comment myself at a couple of points in the book that I feel there is no music industry anymore. Mm-hmm. It's almost as if the controllers feel they're done with it. They feel they've taken it as far as it can go. They've put all the dark occult symbolism in. They've done all the mind control through the sound frequencies. They've done all this demonic stuff at the stage shows. They've debased and degraded the music to such a degree that it's now at the very bottom of the cesspit, the absolute dregs of what you could ever imagine. And it's difficult to know how they could even take it any lower. I'm sure they find a way if they set their minds to it, but it really feels as if they're done with the music industry because there's no real superstars anymore, you know. Mm-hmm. I mean, who can you think of that is going to be spoken about, never mind in 50 years from now, like groups from the 60s, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, Pink Floyd, the Doors, you know, these groups are spoken about with great reverence 50 plus years on. Then think about the 70s, artists like David Bowie and Elton John, maybe, and,
Queen,
Led Zeppelin,
yeah.
Queen, Deep Purple, these kind of acts still spoken about, still remembered. Who are we going to be saying those sort of things about even 5 years from now? Right. In the UK, the biggest artist of the past few years has been Ed Sheeran. And I think that pretty much makes the point. And other than that, you've just got these complete non-entities that are here 1 minute, gone the next, particularly when it comes to so-called hip-hop. As you know, I've loved rap and hip-hop over the years. Well, I did in the 90s anyway, in the golden years when it still made sense. But for the last 20 years, I can say, there's been no really memorable names that people are going to be looking back on with great fondness in decades to come. And that whole genre, they've really done a number on it. They've completely debased that one and sent it down the gutter. So it just feels as if the industry doesn't really exist anymore like it used to. I mean, the charts are completely irrelevant. I can remember back in the day when I was a kid in the 80s, this one kid in school used to bring a radio cassette player in on the day that they would announce the new charts. And everyone would huddle around in their lunch break and listen to the radio to hear the new chart countdown because we wanted to know who was number one that week because it mattered. I mean, you know, do the charts even operate anymore? And if they do, it's all about streams and downloads. Back in the 80s, a platinum record would have sold in excess of 1 million copies. Mm-hmm. Now, you know, a record can probably get to number one on the download chart or the streaming chart or whatever with maybe 300 streams because people just aren't consuming music in the way that they used to. So I think you're right in that I really don't have to be writing these books for many more years because there's not going to be that much more to say unless I'm just going to continually delve into the past and dredge up all these new examples of points that I've already made in these 3 volumes.
So one of the things you have, so I have a bunch of stuff to say about what you just said, but one of the things that I was really taken with and impressed with in all your books, but it really became clear to me in this one because of the dexterity with which you moved between recounting musical history and what that connects to and how it, you know, sort of figures into what's going on now. You've become an absolute historian of music. Like, you know so much about, I mean, half the people you're talking about, I've never heard of before. Now, granted, I grew up in the United States, which is different than the way the music was in the UK. Like certain genres of music that were very popular there were not popular in the same way here, or they were more niche. But you demonstrate an ability to move around between genres that I've not ever seen from anybody except for like really particular kinds of people who were like worked in the industry, signing people to labels and this, that, and the other thing where they had to go out to clubs every single night and be tracking the rising talent. I mean, I know what genres that you tend to be more interested in and less, but you display even a good understanding of country music, a good understanding of types of rock music that I know are not your thing, right? You're not just displaying it with hip hop and R&B and soul, right? And so that's super duper impressive. And the way that you have cataloged all of that, both in your books, but also in your own mind, the level of research that you've done, like if I didn't know better would imply autism maybe, right? Like is something that you have. And as history becomes further and further erased and we don't even understand what's going to happen with the technology we have going forward, you have this knowledge that is going to be important to pass on, and it's impressive the way that you deploy it. So kudos to you on really beginning to having not just knowing the facts of all of this, but really understanding sort of the tone and the feel of all of those different scenes and types of music and the kind of people that inhabited them. So that first of all, and then as far as, music going forward, no, like I couldn't tell you who a popular artist is right now. Like somehow, and I'm sure this is pretty.
And I don't even care. Either.
I don't care either, right? I haven't even thought about it until you just said it, right? So, and I think about all kinds of stuff. The more I got into doing research and all of this kind of stuff, the less I listened to music till it got to the point, which is actually pretty much where it's at, where the only time I actually listen to music is when I go out to a club or a live event or something like that, which has become, even before the scam, increasingly less and less, just for a variety of reasons, none of them having to do with whether I still like music or not, but just, the way things, it's becoming increasingly difficult for me to find an environment that I can go to listen to music that I want to listen to in the way that I want to listen to it, and with anybody that doesn't just creep me out or something like that, right? I'm very particular, about that. It's because for me, like you talk about in this and all your other books, it is a very ritual, important experience in a way that my movement, sort of puts me in touch with my higher self and all the other things that are and whatnot. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to find an environment that I want to do that in. That said, I see that, like, in some ways, yes, music is coming to an end. In another way, it's like, maybe it's not necessarily coming to an end, but it's going to become much more of like a niche or curated kind of experience that one is going to have to really seek out. Or in my case, and this is something that's been coming up over and over for me, I'm going to have to begin curating myself. If I want it to exist, I'm going to have to make it, arrange it, find the other few souls that still exist that, kind of like it the same way that I do, and provide occasional experiences like that. Right. And that's really what it's going to be, instead of this thing that like all the people do together and everyone knows about. And, it's just going to become sort of a different thing, much in the way that like bookstores mostly went away. And there's only a few, a few niche, bookstores that, used bookstores or specialty bookstores that exist on this corner of this town, somewhere off to the side. And it's sad that that's going to be what happens. But in some ways, like anything that's being offered on a commercial level anymore, I have no interest in anyway. So like, it's kind of like stop putting any thought or energy or idea towards that resuscitating itself, because it's not, and just begin with the new thing. Right. So, that's kind of how I'm looking at it going forward, but it's definitely not going to be anything like what anything we ever had before was.
Well, that's right. And we just need to feel privileged that we're of a generation that remembers better times when music made sense and was so much more enjoyable and had so much more of a context to it. I don't know where things are going to go. I don't know what's going to happen in the world. There's a lot of people out there making predictions. As I said, there's a lot of talking head pundits on the web saying, oh, this is going to happen next week and this is going to happen next Thursday. And none of them really know. They're just making it up. There's a lot of names that have sprung up over the past couple of years, Johnny-come-latelys, as I call them, who didn't have any kind of presence on the web before this. And they've popped up and made a name for themselves off the back of the Scamdemic. I've been doing this for 12 years. I'm a bit of a veteran in the game, but so many of these people I'd never heard of before. And the truth is, they don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know what's going to happen in the world, let alone in the music industry. So we've just got to wait and see on that one. I don't know whether the control system as we know it is on the verge of being dismantled and taken down. Certainly there are many narratives out there that suggest that's poised to happen. And of course, I hope that is the case. And I'm seeing quite a few indicators that something of that nature could be imminent, but I don't really know. And in terms of my role in all of this, the way I see it is we're coming to understandings now that no generation in human history has been able to, in terms of the extent to which we've been lied to through history, the true nature of the control system that's been responsible for it, and even the true nature of this reality and what our lives constitute when you get into a spiritual, metaphysical standpoint. And people are bringing different pieces of the puzzle to the table to enable the big picture to emerge. So you've got experts in all these different fields, experts in finance, experts in politics, experts in science and medicine, and all these different things. My contribution is to pour my heart and soul into my research regarding the true nature of the music industry and bring what I've discovered to the table using the trivium method of truth discernment, which is basically what I do, even though I don't scientifically apply it, but it's still grammar, logic, rhetoric in terms of taking information from a wide variety of different sources, cross-correlating it, seeing what checks out, seeing what consistencies there are, seeing what doesn't fit, throwing that out, seeing what you're left with, arranging it, and then presenting that in a meaningful way for other people to understand. So that's what I do. And I think there was a vacancy waiting to be filled for someone to step up and do that in a very high profile, very impactful way. And my dumbass went, duh, I'll do it. and that's what I've been doing with my life for the last 12 years. Somebody had to be wading through this cesspit. Somebody had to be trudging through the mud, presenting all this stuff. And that's just what I've stumbled into. And when I get really reflective about it, I think this is my true life role. This is what I came here for. On a higher level of consciousness, my soul would have made the decision to come here in these times to play my part and make my own contribution alongside all the other contributions being made in all these different fields to this process. And so that's how I reconcile the whole thing to myself and try and make sense of it, because something has to make sense of the fact that my previous life as a DJ is now gone. And everything that I used to place value in just doesn't figure anymore, because I used to just live for gigs, parties, bookings, travel, tunes. And that's all that mattered to me. And really, none of that stuff matters to me now, apart from the travel, which I don't get to do. I would like to. But my entire existence has changed. And now I'm all about writing these books. I'm all about doing these talks. I'm all about presenting this information. And if it means that when it's my time to get on up out of here and cross over to whatever lies beyond, if it means I can do that with a clear conscience, knowing that I didn't squander the opportunities that were made available to me, and I made the best possible use of my time and resources, then I think that's a pretty good position to be in. So I'm bringing all my skills and all my experience from over the years to what I now do. I learned to write many, many years ago, like 30 odd years ago. And I worked on a few magazines, learned how to express myself in writing. And so I'm now doing that. Got into the music industry as a DJ, got to understand the workings of it and all these different genres, as you say. And now I'm putting that to use in presenting this information. And I'm doing a thorough job in presenting all these different scenes and all these different genres. As you said, I have no personal interest in country and Western, for example.
I know.
But the thing about music is that everybody likes. Yeah, I know, right? Everybody likes some kind of music, whether it's opera, whether it's classical, whether it's bloody hillbilly redneck music, whether it's heavy metal, whatever it is. You can always engage people in a conversation about music if you can find the right sort of groups and the right sounds to talk about. And so I want to be able to engage people of all kinds of age groups, of all kinds of demographics in a conversation about the true nature of the music industry. And if that means I have to discuss a wide range of artists from all kinds of different timelines and all kinds of different styles and sounds in order to achieve that, then that's what I need to do. So through my work, I can be speaking to an 18-year-old about mumble rap or drill or trap, or I could be talking to a 75-year-old about the Beatles or Bill Haley and his Comets, So that's why I cover all these different genres. And I've had to learn a lot of this stuff for myself because I didn't know much about many of the artists that I've mentioned. And I've had to get familiar with them because I didn't know about these things. And so that's why the book flits around so many different styles and covers so many different artists, particularly in the sound bites section. Because I didn't want to be writing musical truth for the rest of my days.
Right.
I never really wanted to be doing Musical Truth Volume 72. So there's something quite satisfying about capping it at a trilogy.
Capping it at 3. So you mentioned something a couple of times, so I want to get to that a little bit, and then I thought maybe we can do the sort of second part of this a little bit more on dance music, because there's been a fascinating thing going on with that during this period of time, and that's kind of where you and I have a shared interest. So this will be a little different than some of your other talks. But you've mentioned travel a couple of times, and that you're going to be mostly staying in the UK. Just so I'm clear, is it? I know, are most of the restrictions really actually coming down, or is that propaganda that's been told to the Americans, but that isn't really what's happening in the UK?
It's pretty much all gone away.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is a surprising thing, because at the start of the year, we were getting all the fear-based rhetoric from our government that so many other countries were. Oh, Omicron's come along out of nowhere, moronic.
Right.
And it's out of control. The cases are through the roof, and we're going to have to introduce. Do we say the V word on this, or do we?
You can say, yeah, I mean, you can say it as long as you don't make any claims about it, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm still going to say V instead of that word because I want to put this on my channel without me losing my.
Okay.
So the V passports, we were told, oh yeah, they're going to become necessary for big sporting events and big music events and these big gatherings and stuff, and it really wasn't looking good. And then the government here did a complete U-turn. Mm-hmm. And the very next week they were saying, oh, the figures are waning and it looks as if the V is under control, the other V, the one that makes you cough and sneeze.
Right.
And it looks as if we can lose all the restrictions. So pretty much everything's gone away. Now the face masks, or the goon muzzles, as I call them, are now optional.
Right.
And it's a very distressing thing to see in supermarkets, people still wearing them.
Yeah.
When their beloved governments, whose every word they hang on, has said to them, you don't have to wear them anymore if you don't want to. And they're still choosing to.
Right.
So that speaks to the level of propaganda and fear-based mind control that's been dropped on these people. They are genuinely terrified of somebody next to them in the fruit and veg aisle breathing on them and them dying as a result. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable that these people can't actually do their own research and they're still believing all the lies coming at them from the mainstream evening news. Because, as I've shown in the book, every single aspect of the Convid narrative is fraudulent.
Right.
Each and every one. And there's documentation, and there's whistleblower testimonies, and insiders and experts who can prove this. But anyway, the restrictions have pretty much all gone away here. So life is very similar to what it was in 2019. The only restrictions that have remained are pretty much on international travel. So this is at the hands of other nations.
Right.
So if I wanted to travel from the UK to, for example, Spain, I wanted to take the family on holiday to Ibiza this year. But Spain is still insisting on a V passport to enter any of their territories. So we ain't going. And then when you try and get back in the UK from being overseas, you still have to do one of these dumbass tests. They're still insisting on those. And there's just a few countries where you can avoid the V passports, such as, for example, Portugal in Europe. And places like Mexico and Costa Rica, I hear, are pretty free and easy. But when you come back to the UK from any of these places, you still have to do a dumbass test.
Okay, so even
that's all that remains. Everything else is gone.
So even if you go to another country within the European Union kind of thing, I mean, I understand you guys have Brexited or whatever, but even if, let's say, you went to Portugal, you still have to test to come back.
Yeah. The issue is when you come back into the UK, they're making you do one of these things, unless you want to do a course in common law and personal sovereignty and learn to stand in your power and learn all the terminology that you want to use. And I know people that have expressed themselves in that way and asserted their rights, but they've still ended up being detained at the airport for several hours. Yes. So even if you can talk your way around it, you still might find yourself in a room for 8 to 10 hours.
It's unpleasant enough that you don't want to do it generally. Yeah. So
and most people don't know the right words to say. And they've just made it a hassle, haven't they? This was the whole purpose. They've made international travel such a pain in the ass that most people just don't want to do it. They don't want to put themselves through that stress and that expense. And like I said, until all this bullshit is gone, I won't be traveling internationally again. And that's heartbreaking for me to say that, but I'm not going to capitulate on this. I'm not going to cave in.
Yeah, me either.
That's what they want. That's what they want, you know?
Yeah, me either. I'm not doing any, I'm of the belief that for the larger purpose of this, than the V passports even, or the social credit score system, is to create like a paradigm of authority and testing where everybody feels like they have to be tested and granted permission for everything all the time. And so I'm actually, like, in many ways as much or more opposed to testing than any of the other stuff. And so I'm not doing any of that stuff. Right. It's funny how a lot of people who are super anti one aspect of it are totally okay with taking a test every day. I'm just like, what? Right. But, everybody's at whatever they're at with it. Right. Let's turn a little bit to like observations about the dance music scene and some of the stars from the dance music scene that have behaved in particular ways during this period of time. Right now, I agree.
Are we naming names?
We can name names. So I agree with you it's been absolutely shocking how long it was before any DJs, whether they be famous DJs or just local DJs, how long they were content to sit quiet and not worry about the fact that they weren't being allowed to work or whatever. And I chalk that up to a couple of things. That I think there's a lot of people in the dance music scene who, due to years and years of hard partying and not taking care of themselves, were actually in fear because if they were to get sick, it could be not good. Right. And so the fact that they just partied and did music forever and didn't learn anything else about the world or take time to take care of themselves, at the first hint that there could be something that could affect your health in some way or whatever, they suddenly became very paranoid about that. That could be it for some people.
Or they could have destroyed their ability for critical thought.
Correct.
Through too many mind-numbing drugs. They can't actually formulate thoughts and address a situation in a sensible way. Maybe they just can't do that anymore.
So that, and then I also think that they did a really, really good job with the mind control and propaganda in really infiltrating leftism and hatred of Donald Trump and all of that kind of stuff into the underground music scene and certainly the commercial levels of the music scene. And so anything that was seen to be sort of, anti-Trump or pro sort of, somehow, I don't know, this got wrapped in with wokeism and all. It's just so weird the way that the bedfellows that were created during this, that they were very content to give their life up in support of being anti something that they don't even understand or whatever. So there was some of that. And then, eventually there started to be some people speaking up. Unfortunately, it was speaking up in terms of like, well, we need to get back to our old way of doing things. And the only way out of that is to take the poke. And so they're doing promotions and commercials for the National Health Service. And there's really only...
Yeah, hi, Carl.
Right. I mean, to me, I was very disturbed by being told to take health advice from somebody who looks like a beached whale. right? Like, never mind his, like, I've enjoyed his music for most of my life, right? And he's always had that sort of high energy, infectious personality, and people love him. But I've never seen him look healthy a day in his life. And the idea that he's employed by the National Health Service to promote a message, like, to me, is just like,
you couldn't make it up.
You couldn't make it up. You couldn't make it up. And he was sort of the most famous and well known of that. But you saw this all the way down to the underground level, where people who, their parties, they have a small group of people that go to their parties religiously, not only were enforcing, like, the underground, that's still in Los Angeles. I can't go to a party in Los Angeles because I'm not doing papers, please, right? Like, they're enforcing that. But even before there was that, they were stay at home, shut up, wear your mask, right? Like, all of that kind of stuff. When they're not even public people. So I don't know what benefit, other than some sort of virtue signaling or just expressing some deep-seated hatred they have for people in general, that would be. But it was pretty uniform. And really, like, there's only been a few people, very, very few. And I'm counting, like, not just the famous people, but the, like, unfamous people who just, maybe have a party they throw or a record label they run or whatever. Very few people have spoken out in favor of even just, like, having an open mind. Forget about whether they agree with you or not, or are questioning the narrative, but, like, hey, we're supposed to be a counterculture. Maybe we should make decisions for ourselves and let everyone else make them for theirs. There's been none of that. The only person I've heard in any meaningful way has actually been Danny Rampling, who I've not been really ever a fan of his music. But I was kind of surprised, based on his history, that he would be the one. But anybody is entitled to wake up at whatever moment they do. I know that you did an interview with him. Can you tell us a little bit about how he has differed? Huh? He didn't hear you. Oh, did you not hear something?
Danny Rampling.
No, I heard that.
Okay, yeah, Danny Rampling. Danny Rampling. So I know you had an interview with him and some chats and whatnot. Like, kind of what happened with him, and if you're aware of any others that are on that level or anywhere close, please inform me, because I'm not.
Sure. Well, there's a few, but we'll talk about Dan first. So Danny's actually been a very open-minded character for many years. It's not just during the Scamdemic. I met him for the first time in 2008, and we were both out in Riga, Latvia, playing at an event there. I was doing the hip hop room. He was doing the house, the main room. And we found ourselves sharing a taxi back to the airport the following day. So I got chatting with him there, and we got to the airport, and we discovered, to our horror, that the flight in from the UK had a bird strike on one of the engines, and the engine was knackered. And the flight managed to land in Riga, but it wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't fit to fly. So we were stuck in Riga, couldn't get a flight home for another 24 hours. And Danny very kindly gave up the hotel room that he had at the airport hotel for me, and went and got himself another hotel in the city. And while we were chatting, he spoke to me about the movie Zeitgeist. You're familiar with that movie, right?
Yeah.
The documentary. Yeah. So I'd never heard of it. And round about that time in 2008, I was just starting to look at the work of David Icke in a very serious way. I was reading all his books, and I was reassessing my entire worldview. And so Danny dropped Zeitgeist on me, and it just blew my mind. And I just found it incredible that this very well-known dance music figure had told me about this most profound of movies. So back then, he was thinking in alternative sort of ways. And it's very clear he wasn't your average dance music DJ. I've heard him in interviews talking about, he got asked where he comes from once in a DJ magazine interview. And he said, from London, but originally from out there somewhere in the stars. And I thought, wow, that's a great answer. Yeah. What other DJ can you imagine answering a question in that way? So he's always been quite a special character, and we got into that in the interview. He had a very life-changing experience, a near-death experience when he was very young in America, actually. And so it was no great surprise that he was going to see through this scam. And to his great credit, he was prepared to stick his head above the parapet and stand up to be counted and say what needed to be said. And he's got very strong value systems. when it comes to people's personal rights and freedoms. And he's spoken out about that, and more power to him. But when you take him out of the equation, you're really not left with many others. So I've got to give a shout to Slipmat of Slipmat and Lime, SL2, because Slipmat's on board. I met him at an art exhibition in London just before Christmas, which was an exhibition of photographs from the freedom rallies in London. So Slipmat was in attendance there. And then you've got the odd thing that's been said by Norris to Boss Windross, garage DJ. The odd thing about personal freedoms said by Norman J, who's an MBE. So that's a bit surprising. But apart from them, really not a whole lot. And when it comes to people like Carl Cox, who we were talking about at the start there, I look at the way he's been carrying himself through all of this, and I actually think he genuinely believes the stuff that he's saying.
I agree with you.
So there's a slightly cynical element to it when he makes ads for the NHS saying, "Come on, guys, go and get yourself what my friends at Sheep Farm Studios call the 3-dart finish." And then we can get Clubland and the festivals back to normal. But if that's what it takes, then you've got to go out and do this. But I got Carl's book, actually. He put out a book, an autobiography, a few months ago called Oh Yes, Oh Yes. And I got myself a copy just because I wanted a bit of light relief from all the heavy, bloody Scamdemic crap. And I thought there'll be a good few anecdotes from back in the day, a good few stories from the rave days, and it would just be entertaining to read. And it was. But you get a real feel for the man through reading that book. And he's a very jolly, happy-go-lucky sort of character. He loves life. And I think he's so well-meaning that he sees the best in everything. And I think he's actually quite naive.
I agree with you.
And I think he's naive enough to have bought into the official narrative. And he really does believe there's been this scary disease floating around and it could kill any of us at any time. And the governments of the world had no option but to take these draconian measures to keep the thing under control. I think he really believes that. And that leads us on to all the virtue signalers that we've had on the sort of woke side of the fence, if you like, you know, the real lefty liberal sort of side of the dance music game, which is most of them, it would seem. And I think a lot of them really do believe the narrative as well. And obviously there's a lot of virtue signaling going on. You've got these dance music stars kind of trying to outdo each other in terms of who appears the most caring.
Right.
I care about people so much that we should shut down all the raves and not let people go to parties. And well, I care more than you because I think we should take it even further and force everyone to go out and take an arms spear. So There's been a lot of this going on. But I think a lot of them probably do believe it. But then you've got one or two characters that I think are on a mission. I think they're out there fulfilling agendas on behalf of certain parties with vested interests in the official narrative being sown to these types of communities. And, you know, it's a very different scenario with these characters because they know what they're doing.
Right.
They know it's a scam, but they're coercing large numbers of their followers into behaviors that go against their own self-interests, either for a paycheck or out of some other form of allegiance to these overlords.
Yeah, there's another group of people that I find actually maybe even more disturbing than I agree with you about Carl Cox, and I think there are a lot of people out there that for whatever reason genuinely believe it. Like, you know, I guess in some ways it doesn't seem reasonable maybe to you or I because it's not how we are, right? That like if your whole music, if you're a musician and you don't really spend any time doing anything else, or if you're an athlete, you don't really spend any time paying attention to everything else, then like, you know, you haven't developed the observational skills or this.
Yeah, but you know, a point I've made in a few interviews about this is Danny Rampling comes from the same kind of background as Carl Cox. You know, they're contemporaries. Right. They both came up on the sort of acid house rave scene. Carl DJ'd at Danny's very first Shum party back in '87 and provided the sound system. So they've had a similar background. Right. And they've both been all about freedom and parties and happy smiling faces. That's their whole ethos. Right. And yet Danny has been able to do his own research and apply critical thought and come to his own conclusions,
right,
which are, very accurate. And Carl could have done the same thing because all the same opportunities were available to it. We have the internet. We have the capacity to do research for ourselves. So Danny took the personal responsibility to look into this whole thing, and Carl didn't, but he could have done. He could have done at any time.
And a lot of that goes to the type of person. Someone like you or someone like me always wants to know why and always wants to know what's really going on. And there are people out there that just sort of accept things the way they seem to be. It doesn't make sense to me, but they seem to exist. There's two other groups that I'm kind of disturbed about, right? There's the group that are not on board with this, but won't say anything because I know that they exist, right? Like I have plenty of friends that are DJs of varying levels and certainly are well integrated and well socialized with not DJs that are as famous or well known as Danny or Carl, but are famous enough and well known enough that if you like that genre of music, you know who they are, right? Kind of thing. That will say to them when they're, back at the house after the gig or whatever, yeah, I'm not really down with all this stuff or whatever, whether that be believing or not believing the propaganda or whether it just be creating mandates and rules about it, but they're unwilling to say anything. And then there's also others who somehow think that who aren't down with it in any way. And in fact, are, of similar opinions as you and I, and who think somehow that by keeping quiet about what they think, they'll somehow be able to make a move in the dance music scene where they make lyrics to their tracks, or they somehow later when they've become well known will say something about it then, right? And I understand where that feeling comes from, but I also think that what is it that has happened in our society where having a musical career or being well known or whatever has become so important that you're willing to put aside everything that you believe in, right, in order to be able to participate with the idea, even if you're telling yourself the story that later, and I've heard this from numerous people I know, right, that you're going to do something later or say something later. And then immediately after you sort of acquiesce to the rules to play right now, then something else happens oh, well, the club's shut down anyway, so now you're not going to get any gigs anyway, or you don't end up fitting in with people. So you don't, right? There's not a benefit to, having a strong feeling about something and going against it anyway. It doesn't make sense. And everybody has to decide for themselves how they're going to manage things during their lives during this time. Right. But there's a lot of that going on too. People who are actually, either with us or certainly not against us, but are deciding to sort of not be because of fear of losing their career and not being part of the circuit. Right? Because there is a circuit of the DJs who are popular now, and part of being, on the upper rung of that circuit is exactly what you said, being so, it seems to be how caring they are and how good they are at taking selfies. Right? That where they look like they're just, looking perfect in front of the enormous audience or whatever it is. Right.
Yeah.
And so you're a person I'm not a person who had a musical career and sort of gave it up, but you're a person who's certainly in many cases person non grata amongst the people who used to hire you to do gigs and whatnot.
I would say so. Yeah.
So can you sort of just speak about that to the people that are out there that do listen? Because some of these people I'm surprised sometimes that I find out who listens to my shows or your stuff or whatever. Can you sort of, speak to them about sort of your experience through all of this and how that's been for you?
Well, I just wonder what has been going through the minds of those DJs and other people in the music business that have just stayed quiet through this whole thing. Do they think that by doing that, by obeying all these tyrannical government dictates, that it'll all go away one day? That compliance with tyranny is the way to make tyranny stop? It's not. That only ensures the opposite, its continuation. And the dynamic in the dance music field has been very similar to that in other aspects of music, particularly like rock music.
Mm-hmm.
So in that world, you've had the vast majority of artists who've said nothing at all because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to upset their employers. They don't want to affect their fan base, their careers. Then you've had, of those that have said anything, the vast majority have been reinforcing the official line. So Paul McCartney, you know, wear your mask, guys. Ringo Starr, you know, Elton John doing ads for the NHS. You know, these guys from AC/DC and Kiss.
So weird.
What's going on? Heavy metal, heavy rock. These guys are supposed to be anti-establishment. They're supposed to be counterculture. And they're all telling people to go out and take the armed spear. I mean, I know they're getting on in years themselves and they probably feel they're personally at risk. But what kind of message is that coming from these guys? Where's all the punk rockers?
Right.
Where's all the guys from that scene? Billy Bragg, who's supposed to be a, well, socialist, so, you know, communist, so it makes sense. But back in the 80s, he was supporting the striking miners and, you know, was representing the working classes and was talking about government corruption and the wealth divide and all this sort of thing. And what's he been saying through all this? Strapping on a mask in his social media posts and telling people to do what the government tells them and stay at home. You know, these people are just traitors. And you come to realize that their entire personas and public images have been completely fake. They've just been complete fabrications. They've been putting themselves out there as anti-establishment, or we're not like the other pop groups, you know, we have values and we stand for things that matter. Well, they don't, you know, when crunch time comes. And it's the same in the dance music field. I just shake my head in disbelief at some of these original generation acid house ravers who were there at these free parties. They were there dancing in fields and going to all these warehouse parties and stuff and taking mind-altering drugs and giving the police the slip. Carl Cox talks about this in his book.
Yeah.
He's reminiscing on the early 90s when he used to do all these raves. And he said, you know, he used to spend the night flitting around from rave to rave and giving the police the slip because they were trying to shut all the parties down. So he's doing back then. And he talks about having attended a freedom rally in Trafalgar Square in London in the early 90s when they were trying to bring in the criminal justice bill to outlaw free parties.
Right.
So he felt strong enough about that cause to go and represent in Trafalgar Square. But when the rights and freedoms of every man, woman, and child on the surface of this earth are at threat, he's nowhere to be seen. You don't see him out and about at protests then. So these people have disappointed me hugely. And it's just another reminder of how we've all been duped and conned so much by those that populate the music industry. And I really would have thought better of so many in the dance music community. But I guess social engineering has been done.
Yeah. We've
got woke culture now. And woke culture has penetrated that scene in a big way, as you'll well know.
So absolutely, yeah, woke culture and like very like a lot of importance being placed on making sure that there's a, you know, big space reserved in the scene for, you know, LBGTQ, all that kind of stuff. And there always has been. Like, we don't need to have a movement for that. That's always existed within the scene, right? The part that is really like the most disturbing and contradictory and just still nobody has answered for me, anyone, is that, you know, these people will say, oh, well, we're requiring the passports or the tests or the whatever into the parties to keep you safe. Well, that's pretty funny because when I left the party high as a kite, you didn't stop me. You didn't drive me home to make sure I didn't kill people on the way home, right? You weren't checking my, you know, heart rate and my blood pressure inside when I had more meth and more, you know, whatever inside of me. Then, you know, nobody seemed to care then. Right. Like, and as hard as it is, like, if you're a community that you says believes in people's right to do what they want and experiment with their own body and their own consciousness and, you know, fuck the police and whatever, as hard as it is to accept bad things might happen, that's the right thing to do if you believe that stuff. And I don't see how they can't understand that this is so contradictory of that. And then the other thing, and I noticed this within people in the dance music community and everywhere else, right? Like, people who I know have fought for human rights and civil rights and social justice, even things that, maybe you or I might or might not agree with, but they've had this idea that the person's bodily autonomy and rights are important. Somehow they think it's different when it's a virus or a medical thing, right? Like, oh, that has nothing to do with tyranny or overreach or whatever. We're talking about something very scary here, right? And so it's been interesting just to see the breakdown in their cognitive abilities around, this particular idea. So, and that goes for the dance music community and beyond. But yeah.
What it comes down to is that so few people in this world have a deep personal comprehension of the dynamics of natural law, universal law, and where rights come from. Mm-hmm. Rights come from the creator. Whatever name you wish to ascribe to that force, many would call it God, but they don't come from government. Any claim that any group of men or women can dish out rights to other people and dictate what they are and are not allowed to do is erroneous by its very nature, because no man or woman possesses that ability. And people just don't comprehend that it's an absolute right to live your life freely so long as you're causing no harm. If you're putting no harm, damage, or loss into the world and there's no injured party, it is a right for you to be able to do that. And nobody else has the right to tell you that you can't or to try and take away that freedom from you. It comes down to that. It also comes down to the fact that most people have no comprehension of the dynamic of culture creation and social engineering and how all that gets done. So many of these people now, young people, who are walking around with all these woke ideas in their heads, and they're supporting all these minority groups, and they're doing what the government tells them because their virtue signaling has been entrained into them. They have no comprehension that these thoughts have been created for them, that they're not their own.
Yeah.
People have thoughts in their head that have not come from them. They've come from professional psychologists and behavioral scientists who have very cleverly drip fed this stuff into the consciousness of an entire generation. And I've given examples in previous interviews of how social engineering works. So in the 1970s in Britain, if you're someone who happened to be gay, you had a pretty bad deal because there was a lot of discrimination against gay people. There was discrimination against black people and Asian people. And back then it was tolerated. You know, the Calvin Harris song, it was acceptable in the 80s. Mm-hmm. It was acceptable in the 70s as well. So you could openly walk into a pub and start talking down about black people, saying how much you hate homosexuals, and it was just fine. You would not have got into trouble for that. And in fact, if you started sticking up for homosexuals, you're likely to have been the one that would have been kicked out of the conversation and, shamed. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying any of that was right. Of course, those were terrible attitudes. But in the 70s, that was the zeitgeist of those times. Contrast that with today.
Right.
You say anything vaguely critical of someone who happens to be homosexual or black or Jewish or whatever it is.
Even if you're not even talking about that, you could say that there's something completely else about them. But yes, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you're going to find yourself persona non grata in that conversation. And I just say that to illustrate how social engineering agendas change over time. So a group that would have been demonized in a previous decade is now being celebrated. You couldn't have talked about LGBTQ in the 1970s. Nobody would have known what that was. Nobody knew what transgender was in the 1970s. But these days, you have to walk around on eggshells and tiptoe around and make sure you don't offend somebody by using the wrong pronoun. And all of that has been put into people's psyches.
Yeah.
And they think they're being really progressive. They think they're being really liberal. But in fact, it's being created for them.
100%. Yeah.
And that explains why so many in the dance music field are behaving this way, because that's the way their culture has been created for them.
Well, and at the same time now, the way that it used to be, the way that they know now, you can't speak about minority groups in the way they used to. They now speak that way about people who disagree with them or don't have a poke or whatever, and that's being encouraged, right?
But now, it's white middle-aged middle-class males, right, who are demonized in society. So that's me fucked.
Right. So I have two quick things I want to tell you that are just kind of fun and out there and related to this, and then I'll let you go because I know you have a family commitment. So I have been out to a few dance music events. We have freedom here in Texas. There's none of those rules here. As much as some people in dance music scene here would like there to be those rules, the government won't allow it. So there aren't those rules. But I've noticed something since I've been going out again post lockdown. The sound is terrible. Like the sound at all the events is incredibly quiet and nobody seems to notice. So most of the people in the dance music community here are poked, right? And when I went to see Carl Cox and I was able to, standing right in front of the stage, have conversations at normal voice level where I could hear not only the person I was talking to, but everyone around me. But when I comment to friends of mine or other people there who are poked that it's awfully quiet or the sound is terrible, it's not only quiet, but it's just the sound isn't good, they don't seem to notice. It's very strange. And I have a few friends in LA who have managed to either sneak their way into parties without papers or get a job working at the party and not have to have papers. So they've been able to go. And they've reported a sort of similar thing there. And LA has always had better sound at the parties than here, but they're sort of reporting the same thing. Now, I don't know how closely you've tracked some of the issues around possible Bluetooth connections to the stuff that we're talking about here. But I'm almost wondering if people have Bluetooth speakers in their ears. And so they're right that are part of this whole, operating system setup. And so to them, it sounds, or just something's been altered, because I haven't heard a single complaint about the sound, even from people who are DJ friends of mine who work in sound. They don't know what I'm talking about when I'm like, it's quiet and it doesn't sound good. So I thought you might find that interesting, right? That seems to be sort of across the board. And then the other thing, as far as, I don't think the dance music scene is going away, right? It's actually up and going pretty well in a lot of places right now. But I do think the next thing that is coming and why it's probably going to, it is still going to exist, is mixed media VR kind of experiences, where there will be some people that are actually at the party and others who are at the party in like a VR or holographic format, right? And this might even include the DJ, that the DJ is not actually there, but the people think that they're there. Because I'm watching some of these people travel around the world, come from like really far away to play for an hour, right? Kind of thing. And I don't know if you are familiar with the music, that sort of production group called Circle, right? They do these events that they used to have them at like historic locations that would be like in kind of like Tartarian looking buildings. And it was pretty driving techno and it was pretty interesting. And then over the course of the pandemic, they moved to much more melodic sounds and in like fantastic geographical locations, but you could tune into them with your Oculus, right? One of the things that I experienced like during my many years in the dance music scene is people that didn't seem to have a good sense of their surroundings, right? And that like where like they would, like be repetitively bumping into me, or like they would bump into nothing and say, excuse me, like they thought that they had bumped into things. And I've always felt like there's been some sort of something going on with that kind of thing where people are sort of holographically or remotely able to attend, not just the performers, but people attending. And I think that that's actually going to be the next iteration in dance music, because it lends itself so nicely to things like transhumanism and some of these various sort of technologies that are coming online, right now, metaverse kinds of things, right? Like there will be raves in the metaverse, but they'll actually be at locations. But some of the people who seem to be there aren't actually going to be there. It's going to be like a mishmash of like live and remote kind of thing. So those are my observations. I see some things that indicate towards that on the few events that I've been to and some of the research I've been doing. So I thought I'd share those with you and see and get your thoughts, and then we can wrap it up.
With regard to the Bluetooth thing, and the possibility that people that have taken the arm spear might be interacting with the technology in these events, that's something that has come across my radar. There was a message I was reading this morning from somebody suggesting that that's what's going on, that these people have become part of the technology. It's transhumanism. They've merged their innate humanity with the tech. And I think that that's a very real thing. And the scenario you've just outlined there about these holographic kind of virtual raves, what a complete bloody nightmare. That just sounds like a horror story to me. I don't know why anyone would want to be a part of that. But then again, I come from the generation that remembers analog before everything went digital and electronic. So those early acid house parties and raves, and when the dance music scene really got off the ground in the UK, giving birth to the super club era, even when clubs like Ministry of Sound and Cream and Gatecrasher started, the DJs were still playing off vinyl, and everything was still very grassroots in that way and very analog. And you didn't have all these laser shows and all these Function One sound systems and all this. Everything was very organic and down to earth. And my generation is the last one that holds any kind of connection back to those times. So the controllers are obviously waiting for my generation to just die off so that the next one has no living memory of when things used to be done in such ways. I mean, my parents often say to me, we don't know this world. This world is completely alien to us. I'm like, never mind you. I don't bloody know this world. You know, this world is different from 20, 30 years ago since I remember. And I just don't know where the enjoyment can be in these events anymore when they're completely dominated by technology. But I suppose that's what they do. They seduce new generations with these next big things, and they make them think that it's really cool. And because it's presented as something for their generation, this is your music, your sound, your club, your DJs, they embrace it because they identify with it in a way that their parents' generation didn't. Yeah. And then there'll come a time where that generation dies off and it's time to seduce the next one with a whole new load of technology or names if the scene survives that long. So it's just part of the evolutionary process of any scene or movement, I guess. But what you've outlined there just sounds like a complete nightmare. You'd have to pay me an extremely large amount of money to attend one of these events, and I probably wouldn't even go then because I'd be worried about how it's going to radiate my brain, probably get a friggin' tumor from going in one of those things. So yeah, what a nightmare. If that's the future, then humanity is in a very bad place.
Well, I wonder, like, after being shut down for so long, a lot of these supposedly underground groups, particularly in places like Los Angeles and New York, seem to have plenty of funding to go ahead with events, right? Like bigger, just on par with what they were doing before or even bigger. And they're very clear that they don't want people like me there. Right now, with you know, we can get putting the propaganda part aside, right? Let's just, like, if there's somebody like me there or like you there, and we go home and be like, what the fuck with this party? The sound was shit, and there was like 8 people there. But everyone who's been poked is like, no, it's not. It sounded great, and the room was full because they're interacting with something else. And so they can't have people who aren't part of the technology there because they haven't acknowledged that that's what they're doing yet, right? Okay. You know, and so, and at, you know, at least in the United States, Los Angeles and New York are the hotbed for what will eventually go everywhere else, right? I can go to a party here. I can't go to a party in Los Angeles. They're not doing that here. I mean, the thing is happening with the sound here, but, you know, with the sound, it's a little bit more like, you know, you can describe, you can blame that on the sound's not good or your hearing isn't good or whatever, right? But if I go to the party and say there was 8 people there and somebody else says, no, there's 300 people here, that one's going to be a little harder to overcome. All right, Mark, let's wrap it up because I know you need to go. Why don't you tell people the best way for them to support you with this book? I know there's many ways you can buy it, but which way do you prefer and where they can find the rest of what you're doing right now?
Well, I will mention Amazon, the Antichrist, because unfortunately, it's become very expensive for me to post books out to America and Canada from the UK because all the mailing and courier companies hiked up their costs during the Scamdemic. That's nice of them, isn't it? So it does cost rather a lot for me to mail out. So People might want to go to Amazon for the cheapest option if they're in the United States or Canada, and I completely understand that. But if people do still want to get a copy from me personally, I can sign them and send them out from here. And the best way to get yourself a copy is to drop me an email to markdevlinuk@gmail.com. And then we can sort it out, and I can post to anywhere in the world, dependent on the postage costs. Information on the books is at my main website, which is djmarkdevlin.com. There's a whole section there for the books. My YouTube channel, for as long as it survives. I'm on 2 strikes at the moment. I'm a whisker away from losing 14 years worth and God knows how many hundreds of videos. But if it does survive, it's at Mark Devlin TV. And then everything else, I've got various speech-based podcasts. I've got music-based podcasts. I do one called The Sound of Now every weekend, which is soulful, uplifting house music, which is what I'm into. And then I do The Sound of Freedom, which is conscious message music. And those podcasts are on Mixcloud. And again, you can access those via djmarkdevlin.com as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to go ahead and put this out for the patrons first, and then I'll put it out to the public a little later since we were only able to do an hour. But Mark, you're always welcome back here to talk about whatever you're doing and to just gab about the things we notice and observe. I'm happy to count you as a friend, and you're doing work that even those of us who believe in don't have the patience to do. So on behalf of many other people who I know appreciate your work, thank you very much. And have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thanks so much, Emily.